So yeah, 7 o'clock now, so we'll get started. So I'd just like to welcome everyone to Manitoba Important Bird Areas' second annual spring webinar series. We started last year with the advent of COVID-19, and it was actually very popular, so it has been brought back this year. My name is Amanda Shave, and I'm the coordinator for the Manitoba IBA program. And yeah, I'm happy to see you all here today. So like I said, a couple of housekeeping comments. If everyone could keep their microphones turned off while Christian is presenting to prevent feedback. And we'll be able to answer questions from the chat. And we'll also open the audio for questions at the end of the talk if you'd prefer to ask your question out loud. If you're worried about forgetting your question, you can always type it into the chat. And if we are not able to get to all the questions today, we will be able to answer them in email as well. I will get a Word document of everything that's in the chat, so your questions will be answered. And yeah, so you may have already heard him talking, but our guest speaker today is Dr. Christian Artuso, who will be taking us through the identification of shorebirds that we see in Manitoba. So Christian is a dedicated ornithologist and conservationist with many years of experience working with our local birding scene in Manitoba. He is currently a wildlife biologist with the Canadian Wildlife Service in Ottawa, and he has been key in helping set up the International Shorebird Survey in Manitoba. He also coordinated our Manitoba Breeding Bird Atlas and has been a member of the Manitoba Important Bird Areas Steering Committee since its inception. So I'd like to give a warm welcome to Christian, and Christian, you can take it away.
Okay, thank you, everyone. And away we go. So as we were chatting before the talk started, this is a killdeer, which is probably our earliest arriving, or usually every year our earliest arriving shorebird, and some people have already seen them this year despite the bleak conditions in Manitoba. I'm just gonna, and in order to answer that very first question, look how well prepared I am. What is a shorebird? Shorebirds are actually a very big group. There's actually over 200 species of them in 14 families. However, for our purposes in Manitoba, there are really 3 main families that people think of as shorebirds. And these are probably the best known examples worldwide as well. So one family is the Plovers, and the killdeer represents a plover. And I will go into the differences there in the talk. Another family are the Avocets and Stilts, and here is our American Avocet as an example of that family. And then the biggest family by far are the Sandpipers. The Sandpipers are a huge family, and this Baird's Sandpiper is an example of that family. Can I just quickly check, Amanda, when I move my mouse, are people able to see that cursor or not?
Yes, I can see your cursor move. It's best if you move nice and slowly just because of a little bit of
Yeah.
screen lag.
Okay, yes, good reminder, thank you. So shorebirds are basically associated with shorelines, mudflats, beaches, and so on, but actually they occur in all sorts of habitats. The upland sandpiper that you see here is really a grassland shorebird. That's this one here on the left of the screen. There are some, like our yellowlegs, that we see in wetlands and mudflats, but they actually nest in boreal bogs. That, if you can see the greater yellowlegs on top of the tree in a boreal bog there, that's in its nesting habitat. Some like quite rocky substrates. These are a species called purple sandpiper, which is quite rare, but does occur in northern Manitoba, especially Churchill area. And what most people associate with shorebirds are seeing them on mud flats or sandy beaches or alkali flats and so on and so forth. I'm going to give a little bit of information about them very quickly, just because I think they are super cool, super interesting. I can't resist sharing a little bit of their biology and ecology and a few interesting facts, but then we will dive right into the identification. So shorebirds, at least the ones that nest up in the temperate zone and certainly the Canadian set, are migratory species. All of the Manitoba species are migratory. And in fact, shorebirds are some of the world's longest migrants, some of the most amazing migrants. Okay, I got an echo of myself there. Am I good to continue, Amanda?
You cut out for a minute for me, right when you were talking about amazing migrants.
Okay. Something happened there. I'll start again. So for example, the red knot shown in the top here, this bird is nicknamed the moonbird or B9. This red knot has gone from the Canadian Arctic to Tierra del Fuego in southernmost South America and back over more than a decade, completing more than twice a year, and has traveled more than the distance of Earth to the moon in his lifetime. These are extraordinary migrations, and basically going from the Arctic to the sub-Antarctic and back again twice a year. And these tracks on this map are from Bartel Godwit's nesting in Alaska, going all the way across the Pacific, north to south to New Zealand. And shorebirds cannot land on water. They are doing that mostly in nonstop flights, and sometimes as much as 7, 8, and even 9 days nonstop flying to achieve that. So they are extraordinary migrants. Some of them are tiny. The smallest is our least sandpiper, which is only 13 centimeters, weighs only 15.5 grams. If you see a least sandpiper on the shoreline with something like a white-throated sparrow, you would say, well, it's kind of the same body size. And some of the biggest ones are the curlews. The biggest technically is the far eastern curlew. In North America, the biggest is the long-billed curlew. But even the biggest shorebirds are less than 1 kilogram in weight. So they're quite small. And they have lots of other interesting aspects. For example, they have a fixed clutch size. They all lay 4 eggs. No variation on that, except if they're re-nesting. There are many polyandrous species. That means that the females pair with multiple males, and the males do all the work of incubating and rearing the young. So this red-necked phalarope and this spotted sandpiper are both polyandrous species. And some of them have different plumages, male and female. We call that sexually dichromatic. And in the case of the phalaropes, the 3 phalarope species, the females are more brightly colored. This is a female red-necked phalarope. So all of that is super cool and super interesting. I could go on for hours about that, but I won't. I do want to say one thing though before I forget, that our shorebirds as a group actually are suffering a lot of declines. Grassland birds, aerial insectivores, and shorebirds are the 3 groups of birds that are generally suffering the steepest declines. And although shorebirds are quite a mixed bunch, there are some who are doing well, but the majority have suffered quite steep declines. And we have added recently, for example, Hudsonian Gold and lesser yellowlegs are 2 of the most recent additions to the Species at Risk Act. And so part of what we do with the Important Bird Area program has been to try to monitor the shorebirds of Manitoba. This includes the International Shorebird Survey, or ISS, that Amanda mentioned. We are trying to help in a continental effort to track their populations. Especially the Arctic nesting ones, it is difficult to know how well they're faring, so studying them on migration is actually quite important. And so if that interests you, and after this talk, if you feel game to go out and try and count shorebirds, then please get in touch with Amanda about some of the programming that we do around shorebirds. Actually, it's not just monitoring. Also, for example, some of the weed pools for shorebird habitat at Riverton Sandy Bar and other things that the Important Bird Area program does. Okay, so the rest of the talk, I will focus on identifying the birds. That is intended as a brief introduction and hopefully whets your appetite a little bit. I will go through those families. We'll start with the plovers, then we'll go through the avocets and stilts, and then we'll go through the sandpipers in that order. Basically, I will go from the largest to the smallest. Generally speaking, the bigger ones are easier to identify. So we'll start with the big ones and then it'll get harder. However, I am guilty of switching the order a little bit at times just because I may want to compare species X with species Y if they look similar, for example. So it's not a perfect descending order of size, but it's pretty close. And if you have the sheet, the cheat sheet, Amanda knows me well, she knows I like cheat sheets, then it might help you to sort of follow along. And as we've done in the past, if you would like to have a PDF of the presentation afterwards, we can arrange that as well. Now, because of time, I'm going to focus mostly on the breeding plumage, which you will see. Maybe not right today, since I understand it is pretty blustery in Manitoba, but come May, when the shorebirds are migrating back in force, most of these birds will be in their finery, in their colors, and they are easier to identify in the spring, so we'll start there. It's a great introduction. And then if you get really serious, you can try to identify them in the fall when they're a lot trickier. Okay, so starting with the plovers, we have 5 species of the plover, as you can see on that sheet. The plovers are an interesting group. They have very large eyes, and they have relatively short bills, which are a little bit dagger-like or a little bit pointed, and they use them for picking things at the surface. So they're quite visual hunters, and you can see this killdeer has caught a cricket. This is typical plover behavior, and they'll run around and catch things using vision. They also probe, but very commonly they use vision for foraging. Whereas the sandpipers are doing a lot more of the probing in the mud with their longer bills. So as a general rule, plovers have short bills. The other families have long bills. And there's only 5 species of plover. I'm going to start with the killdeer, even though it's not technically the largest, but I have my reason for doing this. So killdeer at about 27 centimeters is the first plover you should get to know, and you shouldn't have any problem identifying a killdeer. That very distinctive face with the red eye ring, the black lines and white, very marked face, and of course, the thing that makes a killdeer so easy is the double band. So this thick neck band and the thick breast band. The 2 bands, and you've got yourself a killdeer. Unless it's a killdeer baby, because the babies don't have the 2 bands, but 2 breast bands, and you are good to go with your idea of killdeer. And killdeers are very common. They are in just about every type of habitat you can imagine, but often, as you can see from this photo, they're in fields and golf courses and gravel parking lots. They love gravel parking lots. And if you go to oak hammock, please be careful not to step on them. They will probably tell you that they're there too, because they like to protest loudly and are famous for their distraction displays. So technically our largest plover, and from now what you should see in the top right corner is a little bit about the bird's habitat. And then on the left you'll see the species name and a few points pertaining to the ID. So at 29 centimeters, just 2 centimeters larger than the killdeer, the black-bellied plover is our largest plover. But this bird is an Arctic nester. So we only see this bird in migration in southern Manitoba, both in the spring and in the fall. This is what they look like in the spring. So that beautiful silver back, the dark underparts, and then the white line separating the two of them. That's a very distinctive bird. Actually, I prefer to call them platinum plovers because of their color myself, but black-bellied plover is their name. They have a very large bill too. They're very big and robust. And there is another useful feature I'm going to quickly mention, and that is they have black armpits. And this is just to give you a teaser. For the rest of the species, I won't do too much of this, but that can become useful because there is another species, slightly smaller at 26 centimeters. This is the American golden plover. The general color scheme is very similar. It's also got the black belly, also got the white line, and it's got a golden back as opposed to a silver back. But this bird is also an Arctic nester. In fact, American golden plovers nest up in Churchill area in the Hudson Bay subarctic and in the Arctic, and they go all the way to southern South America. So another one of these amazingly long distance migrants. And they are a bit daintier looking and have a finer bill than the black-bellied plover. So I'll go quickly backwards so you can compare the thick and heavy bill and robust black-bellied plover with the sleeker American golden plover. And as I said, I won't do too much non-breeding plumage stuff, but just to illustrate that, this is what they look like in the fall, winter. This is the golden plover with its thin bill, and this is the black-bellied plover with its thick bill. So I just wanted to illustrate that the structural fact, the difference in the bill size there. And I also wanted to illustrate the black armpits, because if you ever have any doubt, the black armpits of the black-bellied plover in any plumage will tell you that it's not a golden plover. So that is useful. Of course, at this time of year, you've got this silver-backed versus this golden-backed bird to tell them apart. You can find them in mudflats. You can find them in fields. Both of these plovers sometimes are in sort of sod and things like that, sod farms, for example, or even plow fields or stubble fields. So you don't necessarily always see them on mudflats. Sometimes you see them in field-type habitats as well. So that's the three big plovers, the killdeer, the black-bellied, and the American golden. And then we have two small plovers, the Arctic nesting semi-palmated plover, which is about 18 centimeters, so much, much smaller than the other three. In breeding plumage, it's characterized by this really dark black line just below the eye and then above with the white front there. And then a single breastband, not two, just one. And the orange legs, orange bill base and black tip, and quite a dark brown color. And you will see these also nest in Churchill and the Arctic and subarctic. So you'll see them in spring migration, you'll see them in fall migration, but not in the middle of the summer. And the only bird that you might mistake that for is the piping plover, but the piping plover is now incredibly rare. It's listed as endangered. Most years we don't have any in Manitoba, and if we do, we'll only have 1 or 2 pairs nesting in the province. They have become incredibly rare in Manitoba. Now the color scheme is quite similar. I'm just going to go backwards so you can see the semi-palmated plover and look, and now I'm going to go forwards. The color scheme is quite similar, but you should notice that the piping plover, firstly, is a lot paler, much sandier color. And they really like beaches, and they really blend in with sandy habitats. And secondly, you should notice that the face, this area between the eyes and the bill, which technically is called the lores, is pure white, and it's all white in there, unlike the semi-palmated plover where the black connects. Some people call this, by the way, a bridle. When you have a bird that's got a line that around like that, it looks a bit like a horse wearing a bridle. Some people don't like that term, but some people like it. So piping plover also has orangish legs and an orange bill base. Its general scheme is quite similar to the semi-palmated plover, but it has this paler face and this very pale sandy color. And if you do find them, then you need to contact Amanda right away, because these birds do nest in southern Manitoba, but extremely rare, protected species and endangered species. And oftentimes we are called upon to basically play guardians. You may have heard of the Piping Plover Guardian program in Manitoba in the past, and sometimes we have to protect them from things like dogs and ATVs and all sorts of other things, because unfortunately the real estate they like is also very popular with recreational activity. So that completes the plover family, 5 species, 3 big, 2 small. I would say fairly easy as a family goes. But even easier is the Avocets and Stilts, and we really only have 2 species. Well, we have 1 regular species and 1 kind of rare species. So this is the American Avocet, which is really the only common bird from this family. And this family is characterized by very long legs, hence the name stilts. And the bill is very thin. In the case of the Avocets, it's turned upward. In the case of the stilts, it's straighter, but they are both very thin. And so this combination of thin bill and thin legs, they look quite lanky. So American Avocet, well, this is probably perhaps the easiest shorebird of all to identify. In breeding plumage, this rich salmon on the head and neck, this long, thin, upcurved bill, and these interestingly bluish legs and black and white body, and very large bird, about 46 centimeters from head to tail. So really an easy ID. And these do nest in southern Manitoba, in places like Okanagan, for example, but generally they'll be nesting in gravel and alkali flats and sandy areas, Whitewater Lake, for example, places like that. They lose that salmon in the non-breeding plumage, but throughout the summer it fades, but usually even into August they still have a hint of that salmon colored head. So this is a feeding flock that you get later in the year where they use that long bill to sway side to side and the whole flock moves in a big circle. When they flock up like that, it's tremendous fun to watch. Although now when they're coming back, they're more likely to be a few birds and nesting pairs. So the only other Avocet and Stilt family member is the black-necked stilt. This bird is quite rare in Manitoba. You'll be lucky to see it, and most of the nesting records in Manitoba are from Whitewater Lake and the western part of the province. It's not as big as the Avocet. It's only 36 centimeters, but really unmistakable with these sort of bubblegum pink legs, long, ridiculously long legs. Like you can see how this bird has to bend right over just to forage because its legs are so long. And the bill is straight much, doesn't really quite have that upturn of the Avocet, but it's still got that thin needle-like characteristic, and it's jet black back and neck. And you've got yourself a black-necked stilt, and if you found one, congratulations, you've just found a rare bird. Yeah, somebody mentioning in the chat that there's more in Alberta. Black-necked stilts are more common as you go west, and they get especially common when you get to places like Oregon and so on and so forth. But yeah, more in Alberta than Manitoba. But we do have nesting pairs in Manitoba some years, maybe not every year. Okay, so that's the plovers and the avocets and stilts. So now we've got to deal with the 26 species of sandpiper. So the sandpipers are a really big family, and actually 26 regular species. There are a few other rare sandpipers. And as I mentioned at the introduction, the general distinction is that sandpipers have long bills. A few exceptions, but generally they're quite long, and the bills are very good for probing. And actually they're quite tactile. They're sensory. They're able to sense, to feel at the end of the bill, so they can probe into deep mud and pull out a nice polychaete worm or something like that. So they are often you will see sandpipers foraging with their head in the mud or even under the water, foraging in that manner, and that's a general characteristic. So again, we're going to start with the biggest, and the biggest in North America is long-billed curlew, but in Manitoba we don't have that bird. For the Albertans, there's one more to add. So our biggest in Manitoba is this bird, which is the marbled godwit. And the marbled godwit is a very large shorebird, about 46 centimeters. So basically the same size as the avocet, but bigger, heavier. It weighs more than the avocet, and the bill is a bit thicker. So you're going to notice it's sort of warm buff color overall. It's marbled pattern on the back. You should notice that the godwits have the bill that turns up, so like an avocet, but thicker. And you should also notice that its bill is two-colored. It's quite orangey at the base, and then it's black about either at the tip or around halfway along the bill. That two-tone bill is another useful feature. And there is one other feature, which is the underwings are a beautiful cinnamon color. When marbled godwits open their wings, they're just magnificent. These cinnamon underwings really stand out. So that's another feature to look for. You may not see it when the bird is on the ground, but if you're unsure, wait for them to raise their wings and look at those armpits. And the other godwit species is the Hudsonian godwit. And the Hudsonian godwit, oh, I beg your pardon, I forgot to mention the marbled godwit nests in the south in the grasslands, very much a grassland nesting species. The Hudsonian godwit nests up in Churchill and the Hudson Bay area, as the name Hudsonian suggests. It actually has a bit of an interesting disjunct distribution, but we have a nesting population in northern Manitoba. If you go to Churchill, wonderful to watch them standing up on the little stunted trees up there and shouting their heads off. So they're only about 40 or 39 centimeters. They have that same godwit bill with the same upturn, and they have that same sort of pale base, maybe a pinkish orange. But in breeding plumage, they have this beautiful red color below, which distinguishes them from the marbled godwit quite easily. That plus their smaller size. And then if you need it, the wings are also very useful because the Hudsonians have quite a distinctive wing stripe. So you can see that white stripe on the black part of the wing. This is what we call the hand of the wing. So the black and white on the hand extending back along the secondary coverts is a very distinctive mark. And then you can see on these top birds, the underwing is really quite dark, almost black, and then the primaries are a bit paler. So yeah, someone mentioning that the piping plovers used to nest in parts of Lake Winnipeg in the North Basin. Yeah, unfortunately, we've not had nesting there in a long time. Thanks, Eric. So, but we're working hard at Riverton to bring them back, maybe one of these days. Sorry, I was a bit slow on that question, but we'll get there. So back to the godwits. Those are our two species. A quick recap. Marbled godwit, the big one, 46 centimeters, with warm buffy color and cinnamon underwings. And then Hudsonian godwit, the small one that we only see in migration with the brick red underparts and this black and white striped wing pattern. So that's the two godwit species. Usually they're pretty easy in breeding plumage. So the godwits have the bill turned up. The next genus is the curlews, which have the bill turned down, and the genus Numenius. The whimbrel is a member of the curlew group of species. The whimbrel, unfortunately, now is Manitoba's only curlew. A long time ago, we had nesting long-billed curlews in southwest Manitoba, and of course, you've probably heard of the Eskimo curlew, which is almost certainly extinct, which used to nest in Arctic Canada. But we're down to one curlew, and that makes it a pretty easy ID, really. If you see any of this brown, cryptically patterned bird with a black downturned bill, you've got yourself a whimbrel. You'll also notice the stripy head of the whimbrel, which helps distinguish it from other curlews. They nest up in the Churchill area, Hudson Bay area, and beyond. They're actually quite widely distributed, but they're only in migration in southern Manitoba, and actually quite tricky to find in migration. You might get lucky, you may see them in migration, but they're not so common, and in part that's because they tend to have a more coastal migratory route. But we do get them sometimes at places like Whitewater Lake, sometimes along the shores of Lake Winnipeg, or even in agricultural habitat close to the shores of the lakes. You may get the whimbrel, and if you really want to see them, then go up to Churchill and you'll see them much more easily there. Okay. Now, next in size is the willet, and the willet also nests in southern Manitoba in grasslands, also alkali flats. You'll see them foraging in wetlands like here, but they'll be nesting even in grasslands sometimes, and you wonder where the water is. They're a very gray shorebird. Like there's grayish legs, grayish bill, grayish body. There's not a whole lot to distinguish them, and there's some markings. The bill is straight and heavy, but that's not an easy shorebird to identify. It's then the name inornatus is inornate, of course, is the scientific name. And so here's a willet when you see one walking around. And in breeding plumage, they have more of this spotting and barring that you see on the breast and the flanks. In non-breeding plumage, they lose even that. But the willets have one telltale giveaway, and that is that when they open their wings, it's almost like they change character completely, because they have such a distinctive wing, a really thick white stripe through the hand of the wing and all along the trailing edge of the secondary. Just a beautiful wing pattern. And they actually use this wing pattern to display. So they fly around flashing those wings and calling pillwheel willet. And they are, they're really quite, for a bird with all gray, they're really so dynamic and so much fun to watch. I really miss seeing them here in Ottawa, because there's basically a prairie or central mid-continent population, and then there's an Atlantic coast population on the salt marshes and on the east coast, but they're not here where I am now. So, and Now, the quick memory jolt for you. I said another bird has a white stripe on the hand of the wing, and so before I flick to the next slide, see if you can remember which species I mentioned that for. I'll pause just for a second so if you can recall, and then I will show you the answer. So that's a repeat of the Hudsonian Godwit slide. So there, the Hudsonian Godwits flying in a flock, and I have superimposed a single willet on the white. So on the right, sorry. The white band is much thicker, runs all through the wing, much more obvious, and I think although the pattern is similar, I don't think you'll have any problem. And I think I may have forgotten to mention that the Hudsonian Godwit has a white rump and black tail as well. I think I forgot to mention that fact. My apologies. So yes, they might sound similar in his description, but seeing them, you would know in a heartbeat the difference. Okay, stepping down slightly, we've got two yellow legs to deal with, and I will deal with them together, although as their name gives you a hint, one is much bigger than the other. So we'll start with the greater yellow legs, the bigger of the two. It's 36 centimeters, bright yellow legs, as the name suggests. The bill is very slightly upturned. It's not an Avocet or a Godwit, but it just has a little hint of an upturn. I hope you can see it there, and you should be able to see that the base of the bill is pale. In nesting, it'll often be yellowish. In non-breeding, it'll often be silvery gray, but it'll be usually pale at the base. Not really orangey like the marble Godwit and Hudsonian Godwit, but yellow to match its legs a little bit. And then they have this gray plumage like a willet, not dissimilar, but the yellow legs of this bird, you won't mistake it for the dark gray legs of the willet and the straight gray bill of a willet. So going backwards and forwards a little bit. And then the eye ring and the sort of spotting on the back are some other features there. They're an interesting bird. They nest through the boreal forest in central Manitoba and all up through northern Manitoba. And sometimes you get them hanging around in southern Manitoba too. So you see them in spring and very early in fall, like July. It's almost a shorebird that you could say you could expect to see anytime. And there may be a few back in Manitoba. I think I might have seen a report or two. I have now seen a couple here just last week. So there are some coming back. And this is a very common shorebird, so you should see lots. They have a very loud call, yellow legs, they scream their name and gives them away. So it's one to look for, one that you should find easily. The lesser yellow legs is very similar, but it's much smaller. So it's 27 centimeters compared to 36. So if you see, if you see them together, you should be able to tell them by size. But if you don't see them together, then you've got a few other things to look for. So the lesser yellow legs has a much shorter bill, straighter, and a bit more pointy. They nest in similar areas. If you are the type of person who likes mathematics, the ratio of the bill length to the head length is the way you can tell them apart. If you're really in doubt and you've got a photo, you can sort of try to measure the bill length against the head length to get there. Is it greater or less than 1.3:1? But usually you don't need that. Normally the sort of upturn on the greater and the straighter needle-like bill of the lesser, plus the small size and the different call, and usually you are good to go. Okay, stepping down, upland sandpiper, a medium-sized shorebird, a very comical, interesting shorebird, and a very much a grassland shorebird. As you can see from this photo here, these are a prairie shorebird. You'll find them in grassland habitats. And they're about 30 centimeters. They have this long, thin neck and small head, and sort of a little bit pigeon-like. And the bill is relatively short. It's actually yellow on the side of the bill, but the top of the bill is dark. So it can look more yellow or darker depending on your angle. If you're looking down on one, it might look dark. Whereas if you're looking side on, you'll see the yellow on the side. They have a wonderful wolf whistle. I would encourage you to go listen to that. And sometimes they'll be sitting up even on wires and poles, giving their wolf whistle to advertise territory, because basically the higher you are, the further this advertising call will travel. So that's the upland sandpiper, and by habitat, fairly distinctive as well. Now we're going to the short-billed dowitcher, which nests in northern Manitoba, in basically the northern part of the boreal forest on up. It's about 28 centimeters, so we're starting to get into what I would call medium-sized shorebirds. I think it's quite distinctive with this salmon underwash here. It's yellow legs, and then it's straight, long bill. And they use that bill to probe in and out of the mud like a sewing machine. So the bill goes straight in, out like a sewing machine needle. And that feeding action is another useful feature. And then when they fly, they have what's called a cigar mark on the back. And this is it. These birds are not in breeding plumage, but you can see by their cigar mark that they are dowitchers. Now, there is another one called the long-billed dowitcher, which you can see in migration. It is tough. Separating short-billed dowitcher and long-billed dowitcher is a real challenge. They are some of that pair is arguably the toughest pair of shorebirds, although some of the peeps might rival them. Very similar to short-billed, but more barred on the side of the breast here, which I'm going to compare in a minute to show you a sort of a darker color. You would think the name long-billed versus short-billed would be a help, but it isn't really, only in extreme cases. There's a lot of overlap. So here's a comparison slide, and this only when you get really good will you. But if you want a challenge, try to pick the two apart this spring. So here on the left, these are all short-billed dowitchers with their more salmon color and their more spotty breast sides. And here on the right are the long-billed dowitcher with their more striped markings on the flanks and the breast sides, and that slightly different tone of red. And also, if you look at their back and wings, you'll see that the edgings of the feathers are white. So that is quite contrasting, all of those white tips. Whereas on the short-billed, they tend to be buffy orange. And it's a little bit of the back looks a bit more orange as a result of that. Whereas this guy, the white and black looks a bit more contrasty. So, but that is a very tough ID. So that's for file that one under the advanced category. And if you get it right, give yourself a gold star. Okay, but similar size two shorebirds I want to mention, which are quite unique, which really, I mean, they're so unique that they're easy to identify just on habitat and characteristics alone. The American woodcock, which is basically a crepuscular species, so it's almost nocturnal, but it's very active at dawn and dusk. You can see the large eye characteristic of nocturnal and crepuscular species. Very distinct, and it's basically a woodland bird. You would look for it in aspen woodlands and so on and so forth. So it's really not a bird you're going to see wandering around on a mudflat anytime. Well, very rare cases. And then it's weird how the eye is positioned up in the head, and then they have these lateral stripes on the back of the head. So unique and unique in habitat. But for the sake of completion, we'll include it. Likewise, the snipe, which the snipe is in just about every habitat and all through Manitoba. Wilson snipe. If you have a very old field guide, it will go down as common snipe, but that's the bird from Eurasia, which has now been separated. So the snipe has this very stripy head pattern, a long straight bill, and when they open up their wings, they just have this magnificent, truly magnificent underwing. And there you can see that stripy head pattern a lot better in this photo. And they both the woodcock and the snipe have very interesting display in that in the snipe they use these tail feathers, which you can't really see, but they use them to vibrating to make a noise to display. And in the woodcock they use specially modified primary wing feathers for that purpose. So those are two woodland species. I include them there because of their size, but now we want to jump back to the mudflats again. And going down a step to 27 centimeters, we have the red knot. This is also an endangered species. It nests in the Arctic. This is the one I mentioned, traveling from, some populations travel from the Canadian Arctic to Tierra del Fuego in southernmost South America. So just an extraordinary migratory shorebird. Beautiful red, salmon red, various descriptors for that sort of color of red. This is definitely, spring is definitely the time to see them when they're in this color. This photo does not do the color justice. I find them incredibly beautiful, and their back also quite richly patterned, if you see them well. So these guys are with that red underpart on a sort of a silvery mottled back, chunky, sort of short stock and fairly chunky with a black straight bill on black legs, and you've got yourself red knots, but a tricky one to find, not very common, an endangered species. And mostly you'll find them along the lake shores, with some exceptions. So Whitewater Lake perhaps is a well-known exception. And then stepping down a little bit is the Ruddy Turnstone. This guy is just a real clown, a real character, and really in spring plumage, very easy to identify. That dagger-like bill, and yes, they do turn stones. They flick stones over to feet under them and grab things with that dagger-like bill. So a little bit of an exception in the Sandpiper family, but they are still a Sandpiper. Bright red legs, like really bright in breeding plumage at least, and this beautiful red back, and then this Harlequin face. You know, and actually every individual is unique in terms of face pattern. So you'll only see them in spring and fall migration because they're nesting in the Arctic. But a true delight if you get to see them at this time of year. Just a magnificent bird. And then going lower again, the phalaropes. We'll start with the Wilson's phalarope. The Wilson's nests in southern Manitoba. It nests in sedge meadows, prairie wetlands, things like that. So you can find them both in migration and all through the summer. They are about 24 centimeters. And if you remember my opening talk, they are polyandrous. So this is a female. She is more colorful than her partner. They have quite a needle-like bill. And for me, I think the most distinguishing feature is this black stripe that goes through the eye, connects to the neck, and then it sort of becomes chestnut and extends all the way along the scapulars. And that is, that's a very distinctive pattern. And then a female will usually have a peach wash on across the neck as well. You can compare, here's a male. So he's got the same pattern, but he just isn't as bright as she is. And of course, polyandrous species, that's not, that's kind of the norm. So that's the same in the redneck phalarope. Again, it's got that phalarope type structure with the needle-like bill, but this bird is only 20 centimeters, much smaller. The redneck gives it the name, is probably the most distinguishing feature. This is a female. The males are again same pattern, but a bit duller. These birds nest in the Hudson Bay and Churchill area. You'll see them in migration, and they have, you may see them swimming a lot. So you will see them on the mudflats, but you often see them swimming in the water, and they have a really interesting foraging pattern of swimming in circles and making a vortex, and then all the microscopic food that basically gets pulled up towards the surface of the vortex, and they feed in that way. So if you see them spinning in tight circles, then you've got yourself phalaropes. And the redneck phalarope much smaller than the Wilsons, and if you see them together, you'll notice that size difference as well. And that swimming behavior also is a really useful trick. And continuing on, that I'm going to have to move a little bit quicker here, and I apologize for that. We've got the solitary sandpiper, about 22 centimeters. It is characterized by this spotting on the back and the white eye ring. It's got this greenish yellowy legs. And this is a boreal nesting species. And the only one you probably confuse it with those greenish legs and straight blackish bill is the spotted sandpiper. But the spotted sandpiper has these spots on the belly in breeding plumage, and of course they lose them in the fall. But in this time of year, in the spring, the only bird that has that black spotting on the white belly like that is the spotted sandpiper. So straight orange bill with a black tip, these sort of greenish yellow legs as well, often bobs its tail, and you'll find them in riparian areas, even along, for example, if you're in a Assiniboine park, you'll often see them along the river, along the Assiniboine River and other rivers in even right in Winnipeg. I'm going to cover some ground quickly. Again, I apologize for that. The Stilt Sandpiper, another Arctic nester, about 22 centimeters. Its bill curves slightly down, but only very slightly. Its most distinguishing factor is the barring on the belly. Really the only one that has barring across the belly like that. And it's got yellow legs, but they're not anywhere near as bright yellow as the yellow leg species. And then these chestnut ear coverts and crown as well. So notice that bill, you can compare it with this bird. This is the Dunlin. I'm going to go back a second. There's the Stilt Sandpiper. Here's the Dunlin. If you're old enough, the name Redback Sandpiper might be familiar, but because of the redback, the Dunlin also has that slightly curved bill and this big black splotch on the belly. So distinctive, so unique. They migrate up through southern Manitoba in May, and they're nesting up in Churchill and Hudson's Bay and beyond. So that's the Dunlin, and also in that sort of 22 centimeter size range. Again, quite distinctive at this time of year. So this is definitely the time of year to learn them when they have those colors. Similar size, Pectoral Sandpiper. These legs are truly orange. The bill is also got that subtle curve. You know, it's actually fairly common in the Sandpiper family to have that subtle curve. It gets the name pectoral because the breast pattern is very sharply demarcated from the white belly. So it's got this spotted breast, sharp line separating it. And that sharpness there, that distinct cutoff between the breast and the white belly, is actually one of the very best features, along with the orange yellow legs and that curved bill with an orange base. And you've got yourself a Pectoral Sandpiper, again only in migration. Buff-breasted, a really tough one, only in migration, nests in the Arctic. It likes lawn-like habitats, like very short grass fields. You can see it here. This is up in Seal River, north of Churchill, actually, in very short grass. So sometimes you'll see them in fields, stubble fields, and so on. They are quite unique with a short black bill and this cinnamon color all throughout. And contrast that with yellow legs, a very distinct shorebird. And like that cinnamon color, when they are in stubble, oh my goodness, are they good at camouflage. So how many buff-breasteds can you find in the bottom photo? There's actually about 12, but there's at least 4 that I have separated out. There's this one here, there is this one here, and there is this one here. Compare that with, this is a black-bellied plover, which stands out a lot more than a buff-breasted. So buff-breasted's different habitat type and very, very tough to find. Okay, we have to get into the small ones here, and I'm running low on time. So I'm going to cover them real quick, and then you'll have to study up. The sanderling, mostly found on beaches. In breeding plumage, has a red head like you see here. But actually, it's almost easier when they start to lose the red. So and they have this ghostly pale gray coloration. These are the ones that you see running around on sandy beaches ridiculously fast. And if you're walking on, Patricia Beach or Delta or somewhere like that, quite often you'll see sanderlings running around in front of you. And that red head at this time of year in some birds is quite obvious. In other birds, it's a bit more subtle. So they're actually a little bit tricky to rely on the red. Just because it doesn't have a red head in spring, it could still be a sanderling. It just might have this sort of softer red sometimes. Okay, and then lakeside habitat and beach habitat is really the best place for sanderling. And then the really tough shorebirds are the little tiny guys that people call peeps. There are 4 species seen here. These are really super tough. This is least, this is Baird's, this is white rump, this is semi-palmated, but they are really tough. So my way of identifying them is as follows. And this is only if you've really got a lot of time on your hands to study the little guys, because these are definitely a step above. I will look at the general color. If they're a more golden brown color, I'll put them in this category. So generally speaking, Baird Sandpiper and least are more golden brown. And generally speaking, white rump and semi-palmated are more grayish brown. And then they're also a size difference. So the really tiny ones are the least and semi-palmated. Least is in fact the smallest shorebird in the world. And then slightly bigger are Bairds and white rumps. And in addition, the wing difference. These ones have really long wings that extend past the tail. These ones have wings that fall at the tail tip, and the least has an added hint because it's the only one of the 4 that has yellow legs. So super quickly, here's the Baird. So just look at that pointed rear end with those long wings, really well beyond the tail. The tail would be about here. And that golden color, this is white rump. It's a more of a grayish color, even in breeding plumage. Again, look at those wings, just well, so you can actually see the tail is here, and the wings are well beyond the tail. This mark, the pink bill base, actually, if you can see that, that's a real confirming feature. And the white rump is also another feature, but it's hard to see unless they're flying. But all of the other ones have a black line through the middle of the rump. These guys have a white rump. And if you did the quiz that I put on Instagram and Facebook and so on and Twitter, that bird in that photo was the white rump sandpiper, and the white rump was the way to identify it. So a real tough one. And then the semi-palmated also got that gray color, and then the wings just not as long, more of an attenuated rear end. I just want to show you quickly why they're called semi-palmated, because the toes are just half webbed, so you can see it there. That is the semi-palmation that gives them their name. And then last but not least, the least sandpiper, smallest of all, quite a warm brown color and yellow legs. So these are the features to get you through it. So that's my way of generally looking at them, but they take a lot of practice. These are quite hard. So I am gonna leave it there, I think. I did have a couple of sort of photo quizzy type things, but it might be best to stop and take questions. I think we're running low on time here.
I was just going to say, Christian, if you have a couple more minutes to stick around, if people have questions, that would be fantastic.
Mhm.
Um,
Sure.
if anybody wants to either type in the chat or you can unmute yourself, remember your microphone button is on the bottom of your screen. We'd be happy to hear from you.
And I see a question about ibis. Ibis and herons and all of that set are usually referred to as long-legged waders. They're in a different family. They're not shorebirds. They're in different families, I should say. They're not shorebirds. So I didn't cover them tonight. It's already a lot with 26 sandpipers. So I always feel it's with the Plumbers and Stilts and Avocets, it's fine, but to cover 26 sandpipers is a lot. So we leave it. We won't cover the ibis and the shorebirds. Sorry, the ibis and the herons and that set of long-legged waders. Someone mentioned red feller. I decided to skip on the red feller because it is quite rare. Yes, we do have red phalarope in Manitoba. It is not easy to see in Manitoba though. They do sometimes nest at Churchill. It's not every year though. It's not common. So yeah, I decided to skip the rare shorebirds. I think I said at the start, there are more than here. I've just stuck to the ones that occur regularly. Yeah, am I missing anything now? That we got a bit of a flurry.
I think Erica just mentioned also Western Sandpipers, which I think is probably would be a similar answer to that with the rare.
It is quite rare. I mean, I did put it in. If you can still see my screen, this is the Western. It is really quite rare. It's like a semi-palmated or a least, but the bill droops down and it's got this sort of chestnut ear cover and crown. So this is a Western. Actually, I photographed this one near Okamic Marsh. This is what they look like in non-breeding plumage, which is super difficult. So yeah, the Western is a rare one. Julian wants a quiz. Well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I will put up. I'll tell you what I'll do. I will put up a quiz just while we'll stick with the questions. We'll keep talking. I've got a few more minutes if people want to hang around, and if you want to look instead of listen, you can try to identify the 4 shorebirds in this photo while we talk. Yeah. So I just have to fully answer Richard's question. Ibis are in their own family. It's called Thresciornithidae. So they're not a heron and they're not a shorebird. Okay.
And then Nora says, thanks so much. I'm ready to head out to Okamic Marsh, which is perfect.
Wait for the snow. Wait for the snow. I mean, at least we got the moisture, and the moisture will really help. If in May there are still flooded fields and standing water, it can be fantastic. But everything depends on shorebird. Everything depends on water levels, of course. So where you find them is different every year.
Oh, we have from Lee, what will happen if we are in a brutally dry year? He was out at Whitewater Lake on the weekend and the water was extremely low compared to the years they're used to. I wonder if the birds will be in different locations.
They will be in different locations, and sometimes they will be, like further in. So they may be they may be there, but the access may be more tricky unless you're willing to walk in or find a few spots where you can get closer to the lakeshore proper. We've got a bit spoiled with Whitewater Lake with all the excess water and flooding and all of this shorebird habitat, not in the lake proper, but in all the small surrounding ephemeral wetlands and often in fields and so on and so forth. So if it gets really dry, it may be tricky, but the people at Whitewater Lake would be happy to see that water level drop a little bit. So yeah, that's part of the problem, Lee, is that I can't tell you where to go because it's different every year. And sometimes, some years, east side, north side, west side, south side, different parts of Whitewater Lake can have the mother lode. And even in different seasons in the same year can be quite different.
We've got a question from Diane. When would be the best time to try and see, I'm guessing, shorebirds in general migrating through?
Yeah,
Yeah.
May is the magic. May is just magic in Manitoba. Manitoba's got May magic in general. I mean, killdeers are here quite early. April already. There's killdeers, and the yellow legs are coming in April. But really May, and then peaking at the end of May. End of May is you've just got everything. You've got the local nesting birds and the Arctic migrants coming through. And with shorebirds, even early June, actually, even through the first week of June, maybe even June 10th, depending on the year and conditions and so on. But May, start to look for shorebirds in May, especially the last 2 weeks of May and the first week of June is really great point. I see, yeah, sextons might be good this year. Someone's mentioning, and Paul's asking about buff-breasteds. Well, buff-breasteds, I still think whitewater lake is the best place for them, but you have to look in the fields around the lake more so than the mudflats. And you've got to look really hard in the stubble fields and things like that for buff-breasteds, Paul. They are a very tricky bird. It actually took me, I think, 5 or 6 years to see my first buff-breasted in Manitoba. So they're not easy. And then I got a bit good at finding them, but they're not so easy. Oh, we got a vote for American golden plover as the best. They are stunning. They're definitely golden, Lewis. And okay, Hudsonian short-billed Dowager buff-breasted Sandpiper. Those are what you got. Okay, that's very interesting about the Peace River. Thanks for that list. That's super cool. So I'll just quickly do this while we were chatting. If you didn't get them, or if you did, nobody's being put on the spot here. So Ruddy Turnstone on the left of that picture, American Avocet. You got those, you're good. They're the easiest too. These are Hudsonian Gold, which there's actually a mixture of plumages here, which is a little bit of a trick, but this bird is in nice breeding plumage. This bird is getting there. It's transitioning a bit slower. And these birds really are not there yet. So those are all Hudsonian Godwits, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then this little guy with the straight bill and the salmon underparts and the yellow legs is short-billed Dowager. So if you got Ruddy Turnstone, American Avocet, Hudsonian Godwit, and short-billed Dowager, then give yourself 4 pats on the back. So that was sorry, I'm reading the chat at the same time. Jillian says you need Christian to see buff-breasted. That's because I pay them, Jillian. I pay the buff-breasteds to be there.
I was gonna add, the only buff-breasted sandpiper I have seen was also while I was birding with Christian, so
yeah.
can confirm.
You do have to look. You do have to make, in answer to your question, Paul. You do really have to be looking in those stubble fields. And I guess my tip would be look for the golden plovers and black-bellied plovers in the stubble fields, and then when you see those, you're like, aha, get out your scope and scan really well, because you could easily overlook the buff-breasteds in the same field with either of the big plovers. And if you want to find them at Oak Hammock, then the sod farms along 84 North in the month of August would probably be the best time to do that. And again, the trick is to look for the big plovers, the black-bellied plover and the golden plover, and then look and see if there's any buff-breasteds with them.
This might be a good time to wrap it up. And a big thank you to Christian for joining us and for spreading his shorebird and general birding knowledge as well. And thank you for everybody who's stuck around with us. And yeah, just a reminder, we have another webinar running next week about banding and marking birds with Paula. And also we are looking to have opportunities to have people go out and identify shorebirds in the field. So we will be at Oak Hammock Marsh's Migratory Bird Day on May 8th. If you're interested, we'll be leading shorebird walks, which you can sign up through Oak Hammock. And we're also looking at having an opportunity to run in southwestern Manitoba as well. And so there'll be more details on that to come. But yeah, So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Christian. And I hope everyone has a great night and gets to see some cool shorebirds if it ever stops snowing in Manitoba.
Thank you so much, everyone. And get in touch if you have questions, and we'll do our best. Bye now.